Hey everyone, it's Liz from Thrust Flight. Today we're going to be discussing the proper technique for the short field landing.
All flare still like normal, and we should touch down right on our numbers. All right, Lance, so today I'm going to demonstrate to you the short field landing here in our 172. So we're on our downwind for our runway, and we're at our beam point, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the power back to 1700 RPMs or so. I'm readjusting my pitch because I just want to slow down and begin a gradual descent. So for me, that was a little bit of pitch up as I reduced that power. A really normal pattern up to this point, okay?
Okay.
All right, we're waiting till we're 45 degrees past our touchdown point. We're beginning our base turn.
So just like every landing approach, it's important to be stabilized. They actually call that out specifically in the standards for this maneuver for your check ride, that you have to have a stabilized approach. We talk a little bit about how the approach is not that different at this point, turning from downwind to base from a normal approach to landing. So you need to make sure you're doing all those good behaviors and good habits that you've been practicing thus far in your training.
We'll make a call here. Rockwall area traffic, thrust 484, left base for runway 17, Rockwall. All right, I'm surveying the runway as I come around because I want to judge my altitude. Am I high? Am I low? Does it all look all right? So we're planning to land right on the runway numbers 17 because we're simulating this as a short field. So altitude-wise, I feel pretty good. We're a little fast, so I'm going to go ahead and put in a notch of flaps. Let's get speed under control.
You'll notice I said I was going to land on the runway numbers because it's a short field landing. Basically simulating the runway is so short that we can't waste any pavement because there wasn't much to begin with. In the test standards, as you're preparing for your check ride on this maneuver, it says landing on the designated point or runway numbers or runway threshold. So you want to make sure that you're talking about that with your flight instructors you're practicing so that you can land on a specific point, right? That it's not just we're aiming for the general beginning of the runway. It gets really specific for this maneuver.
Okay, anticipating the turn, a little bit of rudder, a little bit of aileron. As we roll out on final here, we can see we're slightly high for it, but that's okay because we've got another 2 notches of flaps. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the second notch here as we roll out on final. 20 degrees flaps. Rockwall area traffic, thrust 484 on final for runway 17, Rockwall. Okay, I'm reducing my RPM so that I can increase that sink rate, right? What I'm looking for here on final for the short field landing is an approach speed of 60 knots and full flaps. So I'm going to go ahead and put in flaps. The manual for this aircraft says 61 knots, so I was rounding.
Okay, so you notice I talked specifically about the airspeed we're going to fly the final approach at. Your aircraft might have a checklist in the manual specifically for short field landings. That's what I'm referencing here when I say it says 61 knots. That's exactly what Cessna has designated for the short field approach speed. Your aircraft might have a different number. If there's no number designated, you're supposed to do 1.3 times your VSO speed. The reason why the speed is so important is it's the key to landing at the point you want on the runway. If I come in with extra airspeed, I'm going to miss my point. I will have too much energy as I'm approaching and land way too long. If I'm slow, it means I might not have enough energy to meet it, or that I'd be sinking so quickly now I'll be too low as I'm approaching the runway. So the speed is quite important here. We don't want to be too close to a stall, increasing risk, but we don't want to have excess speed because that means extra landing distance.
Okay, so you can feel we're starting to sink a little bit more as I reduce that power, okay? We're showing just a little bit slower than the approach speed I want, so I can lower the nose, which is good. I want to lose altitude, and I can add a teeny bit of power to help hold the airspeed there.
So when we're on final, it takes a pretty coordinated effort between power adjustments and pitch adjustments to keep the airspeed that I want. Every time I change the power, I'm probably going to need to change the pitch to hold the airspeed and descent rate that I'd like. When I change the pitch, it's going to change my airspeed, and now I might need a power adjustment as well. So it's really, each time I adjust one, I seem to need to adjust the other to keep it exactly on target. So I'm trying to call out specifically here when I'm making a pitch adjustment or when I'm making a power adjustment. So in this example, I said I'm too slow. The nose was slightly high. I was below my target airspeed, or the airspeed I wanted. So I lowered the nose. Now I'm building airspeed, which is good. I was slow. That's my desired result. And I'm losing altitude, which was also good. We were still high at this point in the approach. So a desired outcome and correction.
I'm really just using my pitch and power to manage my sink rate. I want to be coming down at that slower airspeed, but losing enough altitude to come right for the runway numbers. Lowering the nose a little bit, adding a little bit of power so I can increase back to 61 knots, right on.
All right, so I want you to focus on this view where we're looking ahead in the aircraft straight at the runway as we're approaching. There's two really important points for this short-field landing. There's an aiming point and a touchdown point. Let me tell you about the difference between the two. An aiming point is where I'm pointing the nose. I tell my students it's like a fisherman is standing there and he's caught your propeller on his fishing line and he's pulling you in directly to that point. That's where I'm aiming. It looks like if I didn't flare, that's where my airplane would crash into, the aiming point. My touchdown point will actually be slightly beyond that because when we come in for a landing, we flare, right? We raise the nose, prepare the airplane for a proper pitch attitude for touchdown, and float a little bit, right? That flare carries us slightly further down, causing a touchdown point. So it's important on the short field landing that we practice choosing proper aiming points so you know how far am I going to float? Am I approaching at an appropriate height on final, or do I need to make adjustments? And that is controlled by the airspeed again on final. I can't tell you that enough times. That's the most common error I see is improper airspeed management, usually being too fast on the final approach for a short field landing. So look again here, it looks like my nose is pointed right at that first arrow in the displaced threshold. That's my aiming point. My airplane's gonna float about 400 feet or so in the 172 and will take me to my touchdown point of the runway numbers. So let's look.
Right, I'm reducing power to idle. I'll flare still like normal, and we should touch down right on our numbers.
Okay, so if we stop right here, if you'll watch closely, we come past the runway threshold, we come to the numbers 17, our runway numbers, which was our designated and desired touchdown point, and I actually land just slightly past them. We're not very far, but it's not perfectly on the numbers. The test standards for this maneuver allow for a small buffer. They say that you'll land on your desired touchdown point or within 100 feet beyond if you're the commercial pilot, or for the private pilot, it's land on your designated touchdown point or within 200 feet beyond. So they're not expecting perfection, but it is a very tight standard that they're keeping you to because this is an important skill as you fly into shorter runways.
All right, still maintaining directional control on the rollout here, and we should be applying max braking, pulling all the way back on the elevator, and we'll take the earliest turnoff we can make.
Okay, so this is where I see the next most common error on the short field landing is the after landing procedures. Students come in, they perform the touchdown, and they're so relieved that we touch down on their point or within the test standards for it that it's like we forget we're still flying an airplane and we don't do any of the stopping and braking procedures required for this. So imagine you're landing on a really short runway, you touch down near the beginning of it, you would still want to be getting on the brakes and stopping your aircraft in a pretty short amount of time because there's not much runway to continue rolling down. So if you listen, I talk about a few of the procedures I'm doing to accomplish the maximum braking there.
Still maintaining directional control on the rollout here, and we should be applying max braking.
I'm pulling all the way back on the elevator to increase my braking efficiency.
Pulling all the way back on the elevator.
I'm also applying heavy brake pressure, and this is something that takes practice. How do I apply enough brake pressure that it's the maximum, but not too much that I'm going to stop my wheels from turning and lock up the brakes, right? You don't want to be skidding down the runway or causing a flat spot on your tires from braking too heavily, but I do want to brake quickly. So this takes some practice with your instructor, but we want to have the maximum braking. Enough that you're stopping the aircraft in short order, but not applying too much that it's causing damage to the aircraft or the tires, etc. Okay, so that concludes the short field landing video. The last piece I want to share with you is the airspeed requirement as I'm approaching on final. For the test standards, it says the private pilot has to hold the designated airspeed from your manual or the VSO times 1.3 at +10, -5, so you have a short buffer there. Or if you're the commercial pilot, it's +5, -5 knots. That about wraps up our video on short field landings. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions or if you like the video, leave us a comment and please subscribe or ring the bell so you don't miss out on future videos.